Hey, church, blessings as we continue on our journey with the Beatitudes. We're looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 10, where Jesus is talking to the disciples on that mount, the Sermon on the Mount. And he's telling them, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." In other words, happy are you who are being persecuted for wanting to be right with God, who are right with God, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Not only when being persecuted, meaning it means suffering for your belief, for my belief in Christ. That's what suffering means. Suffering for your belief in Christ. Okay, and we see what's going on with us Christians who are being persecuted because of our belief in Christ. We see it today. We see churches being spray painted. In DC, we see churches, crosses wanting to be torn down, churches being burned. We see things going on within the news. They still want to take out the phrase "In God We Trust," not only in the federal buildings, but also in the dollar bills. We see persecution with some, our families. We see, those who are against us, for believing in Christ. We see it at our jobs. We see it at within our cultures, okay, and schools. They keeping prayer out, and you just see a lot of persecution because of our belief in Christ Jesus. But Jesus also told us, he said, listen, if they hated me, guess what? They're going to hate you. So be ready. And this is what's going on. Tony Evans said this here. I like a lot of quotes from Tony Evans. He said, being persecuted for being right with God, for righteousness' sake, means that we display kingdom characteristics within Matthew 5, verses 3 through verse 9 and 10. 10 of where we at right now. And you can think of that. And so, before we were about me, myself, and I, like the world. That's what the world is today. All about me, myself, and I. In the book of Judges, if you read it, the whole book of Judges, okay, the main theme of Judges is these people wanted to do what was right in their own eyes. Well, if anybody does anything right in their own eyes, and their own way of thinking, it's right to them, even if it looks totally jacked up, even if it means killing someone, even if it means persecuting someone to the T, because it's my belief, that's it. But God says, no, it has to be about him. That's it. God's truth against man's truth. Who you think is going to win? Okay, exactly, God. And so, but that's what we're up against. I think of the passage, remember Paul, who was Saul at one time. And remember in the book of Acts, he was persecuting the church to the max, to the fullest. He checked off, consented on Stephen's death. And he even held the men's clothes who were doing the stoning, killed Stephen. Okay, and he's sacking that, and consented to him. But I read now that Saul is now Paul because of meeting Jesus that one time, and Saul, who was the persecutor, became the one being persecuted because now he believes in Jesus. But Paul says this here in 2 Corinthians verse 11, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 24. He says this here, speaking of suffering for Christ's sake. He says, this is what he was, in verse 24, it says, from the Jews, 5 times he received 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times he was beaten with rods. Once he was stoned. 3 times he was shipwrecked. The night and day he had been in the deep, in the waters, and journeys often, and dangers of waters, and dangers of robbers, and dangers of his own countrymen, and dangers of Gentiles, dangers of the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers in the sea, dangers among false brothers. He was often hungry. He was naked, often naked. And he was fasted and often cold. All those things Paul went through. Suffering for Christ. He was being persecuted. And a lot of times we're going to go, if we haven't been already, we will be. Maybe not like Paul, but in some sort of way we are being persecuted right now. And that may just be like mocking us, ridiculing us, saying things against us, because of who we believe in. So we see a lot of that going on. But, all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, is what God is saying. We will suffer. I like to think of that one passage, see if I can find it here. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. Peter says this here. He's speaking of persecution during the time of Nero. Peter says, but even if you should suffer for righteousness, for being right with God, okay, you are blessed, okay? You're blessed. Do not fear what they fear or be intimidated, but in your hearts, regard Christ, the Lord, as holy, ready at any time to give a defense to anyone who asks, okay? Anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, ready to give an answer, ready to give that defense of why we believe in who we believe in. Why do we? Okay, that Peter is talking about if something is happening in particular, like if we at a mall and something happens and there people are coming against Christians and they're saying bad things about them, and they're just standing tall, just praying for that person, even not hitting them back or something like that, but they're just being persecuted. I even think of the guy that shot up. This is back in South Carolina, back in 2015, I think it was. The Christians were having a Bible study, and it's about 9 or 10 people, something like that. And gentleman walked in, and this is a predominantly black church. White guy walked in, and he sat with them for the Bible study for about 45 minutes. Took his gun out of a bag and shot up all of them. Killed 9. I think it was. He killed 9. The next day, those people's families that were dead, the victim's family, they said that they forgive that guy who did the shooting. Being persecuted. That's what it's about. And yet these people, they forgave the guy. Of course they were hurt and everything else, but they forgave him. This is what persecution looks like. And we see it in a lot of churches more and more and more. So a lot of people say today that the reason why we don't meet fully in churches is because with the church is really being persecuted. They may be a little bit of the truth because of the COVID-19, but still people are dying, with this COVID-19. So we still see that. But as we look in what Jesus is showing us from his word, the church, his bride, will be persecuted. And we got to give a defense when we are being persecuted. Why are you guys allowing this to happen? How could you not say anything? How could you not do anything? This is what Jesus is talking about. When other people or individuals or groups come against us, and we just still stand tall, not of ourselves, but because of Christ. And what Peter is saying from that passage, 1 Peter 3, 14 through 15, is that people are going to be watching. And they want to, after it's all over, said and done, they may want to talk to us. and saying that I can't believe you stood up, not in a prideful way, but you stood up and you took it. You took the punishment. You took the persecution. You took the suffering. Why is it, why did you do that? And that's our defense to give the gospel at that point, It's Jesus. It's because of him that I'm able to stay the course, that I'm able to push through in the midst of being persecuted. So I'm praying for all of us that during this time, there will be more and more things happening. The church will be getting persecuted more and more. But remember, our redemption is drawing near, even though and still it is drawing near. And our job right now, it's to be about God's business for what he wants us to do, and to pray for those who are against, who are opposite. Okay? Because one day we may get, whether it be family or jobs or whatever, they're going to want to talk. And this is a prime opportunity right now for what's going on. Praying for y'all though. God bless.